have a woman who believes in her heart and soul that she can get her grandson to lay down his arms and come out.
Well, I'm his grandmother, and he's my grandson. All my grandchildren are good kids, because I've taught them well.
And so I approached and told him that I was there, and I'd like to speak to the agent in charge, and I was a lawyer, and I had David Koresh's grandmother with me, and I wanted to see about talking to him. And after a few minutes, another one came up to me who was obviously the guy in charge and was very surly, and declined to give me any information at all. So I started to leave, and just as I left and turned my back and started walking toward my van, I heard a voice say, coming from one of those people, I don't know which one, but one of them said, "I hope she has told him goodbye." That was the mentality of the people who were guarding the gates. Those were federal law enforcement authorities. And their attitude was, we are going to get revenge against David Koresh, and if that means we have to eliminate all of them in there, that's just fine too. That was the attitude that they had.
On a special live call-in show here this morning, listeners had strong opinions on how they think this tragedy should now be handled. A majority seem to want law enforcement to end it all quickly.
Good morning, Waco 100.
I'd vote for going and just take him out.
All right.
Well, I do believe, and I think they ought to go in there to get it over with, because I think it's costing us a lot.
What could have been done to get the Davidians out of that compound without bloodshed?
We were on the way to doing that. On April the 14th, there was a major breakthrough, and that breakthrough was David Koresh's letter to me, which I promptly gave to the FBI, that said that he'd received his mission, that he was working on writing his interpretation of the seven seals, and that everyone inside was relieved that they didn't have to die now, that the prophecies were not being fulfilled now, and that this would be resolved.
People don't understand how important that was. David Koresh and his people believed that God's message for our generation could not be written and should not be written. And David Koresh had never before written down his ideas. He believed that he had received a message from God saying, "Now, David, write. Before I told you not to, now I'm telling you you can."
He waited 51 days, and then he said, the word came to him and said, "Write," and he wrote. This was brought out the day of the fire by one of the survivors. He was keeping his promise of April 14th. We believe they would have all come out safely.
This was pulled out of the fire, the tapes were, and then this then was written up as evidence that he was working on that message on the seven seals.
All they had to do was say, "We've got a disc, we're going to be sending it out."
When the FBI advised me of their plan and the possibility of the insertion of gas, I did notify the White House counsel and kept in contact through the White House counsel. I'm sure the White House counsel advised the president.
We're missing some of your telephone logs, particularly April 17th, 18th, and 19th, and our problem is that they've all been redacted. And is there any chance that we could get those?
I can't be helpful. Nobody's ever asked me, but I have a copy of these same logs, and you're welcome to them as far as I'm concerned. Except, I have to tell you, the 17th and 18th were Saturday and Sunday, and so therefore there wouldn't be any. These are basically logs of people who called and left a message for me to call them back. Not necessarily everybody I talked to.
What I was faced with was a situation where the negotiators said, "We think we have reached an impasse. Nobody else is coming out voluntarily." We looked at the entire situation and we made the best judgment we could. I'm very satisfied that in the information furnished to me by the FBI, I was informed.
Do you know if Attorney General Reno was ever advised that there was this new development before she made her decision?
I don't know, because I doubt it, because it was not from our understanding of it, and the judgment was looking at what they were doing. Maybe that she was not. I don't know, but there wasn't any reason to, because it was not a serious plan. It was just another delaying tactic.
The FBI testified before the House hearings that the negotiations had reached an impasse. They told the Attorney General they weren't coming out, and that there was a stalling tactic, and they weren't working on the 7 seals. Their own negotiators had reached an agreement knowing that the first seal was finished, and in order to get proof of it, had sent in typewriter ribbons so that they could get that proof in their hands, and yet the very next morning they launched the gas and tank attack.
Supplies a number of irritants to the nostrils, to the eyes, to the skin. Just touching to the skin can be extremely painful. You can have certain symptoms of nausea. You can have certain symptoms of inflammation with regard to membranes. So it is extremely uncomfortable.
Boot camp trainees are briefly exposed to a mild amount of CS for a few seconds. The Davidians received more than 10 times that dosage for more than 6 hours. CS isn't a gas, it's a chemical powder. At Waco, the CS powder was dissolved in methylene chloride, a volatile chemical used for stripping paint. Together, they formed an aerosol mist when sprayed through huge steel injectors fitted onto the tanks. In closed spaces, CS alone can cause unconsciousness, death, and can be ignited by a spark into a fireball. When CS burns, it produces hydrogen cyanide, the same gas used in prison gas chambers.
Did you tell the Attorney General that infants would not die or be harmed?
I told her there is no increased sensitivity to the effects of CS on infants, young adults, and older people.
I believe that using CS gas against infants, against old people with respiratory problems, there were 60, 70-year-old men in there, and there were young children. That's torture. And I can just see those kids barfing, vomiting, screaming, because you can't possibly have a gas mask that'll fit a little kid.
Didn't their report say that gas masks don't fit on these babies?
That's correct.
And didn't they know that?
They should have known that.
Explained to me that they were pouring fuel and that they were making Molotov cocktails to throw at the tanks. Now, they never did throw Molotov cocktails at the tanks. The conversation about that takes place in the early morning hours, 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning. The fire didn't start until right around noon.
If you come out now, you will not be harmed. Come out with your hands up, carrying nothing. You are under arrest and stand on.
Shortly after they started, they began also not only spraying it from the CVs off of the booms, but they started firing ferret rounds on the excuse, of course, we learned later that we were supposed to be firing at them.
What did you feel? What were your emotions?
Well, we definitely weren't believing what we were hearing over the loudspeakers, that they were not entering the building or this was not an attack. You know, we were told they weren't going to be shooting, and yet they're firing what amounted to mortars or rockets at us, these ferret rounds, which sounded like a mortar.
Were you afraid?
Yes.
Experts say the ferrets, or barricade-penetrating cartridges, that were used are non-pyrotechnic or non-incendiary. They introduce CS gas in a vapor form as the tip disintegrates. But experts also say the ferrets pack enough force to kill someone with a direct hit. Empty ferret boxes found on the compound grounds warn against firing the rounds at people. Despite that warning, agents fired ferrets into every window of the compound, and according to the review, any movement inside was targeted.
With respect to the use of military weapons, these pieces of equipment were unarmed, as I understand it, and were contracted. I mean, it was like a good rent-a-car. They were
a good rent-a-car? A tank going into a building?
At 9 o'clock, Attorney General Reno left the command center at FBI headquarters to give a speech in nearby Baltimore. From then on, Waco decisions were made by top officials of the FBI and the Clinton administration.
4 minutes into the raid, it escalates. The 48-hour plan, according to the testimony, is gone. We're now going to do a massive insertion of gas into every window. Did you consider staying in Washington, D.C., given that escalation 4 minutes into the plan?
During the course of the morning, the question arose whether I should cancel the speech, and the FBI did not want me to do so because they thought it would attract attention if I suddenly canceled a speech. It looked like there would be an emergency.
One of the most inadequate parts of the Justice Department's report is their failure to describe the decision-making process at the command post. I think that is unpardonable. There is nothing in the investigation of what was going on in the Washington command post, where they had a situation room which was supposedly constantly in touch with Waco. What were the communications that went on? What were the decisions made? And that we have never heard.
Dozens and dozens of rounds have been fired at FBI agents. The FBI, in an effort to demonstrate its extraordinary restraint, has not returned fire thus far.
Almost 2 miles above Mount Carmel, a surveillance plane was photographing events on the ground with a forward-looking infrared camera, commonly called by its acronym, FLIR. Edward Allard helped develop the FLIR. He's a former manager of the Defense Department's Night Vision Laboratory and holds several patents on FLIR and night vision technology. Allard explains what happens as a tank approaches the rear of Mount Carmel around 11:16 a.m. That's the side the news cameras couldn't see.
Thermal imagery is not the same as black and white imagery. Even though we're going to see images that look like it's black and white television cameras, it is not. This type of imagery is the same type of imagery that was used by our armed forces in Desert Storm. The bright spots in this particular film are spots that are hot. The gray area are warm, we'll say, and the black areas are cool. They're relatively cool. They're still pretty warm for a Texas midday, but they're a lot cooler than the rest of the surrounding area. If you look carefully, what you will see is the exhaust plume of the tank. You'll see the plume twice when the operator steps on the gas. There it is again. And now what you will see is a short burst. There. That short burst, we feel is a gunshot. The next view is a view in slow motion. As the vehicle approaches, we see the plume from the engine. As the vehicle approaches, we see the plume from the engine. And we have the gunshot. Now, freeze it there, please. You can see now the outline of the tank. You can clearly see the outline of the tank. There's the blade. There's the blade in front of the tank. There's the opposite side of the tank. This hot area back here is the engine, the deck area. And it appears that the shot that we're looking at is coming off the rear deck area of the tank. This particular one, the burst lasted about 1 second. And we will see shots similar to this throughout the tape, and nothing else appears with the type of thermal signature that we get of gunshots.
Did the FBI fire one shot, even one shot at the Davidian compound?
Not throughout the entire standoff.
What we're going to see here is what could be called an infantry tank maneuver. We notice the tank. This is the tank smashing into the building. And we'll also see gunfire, multiple gunfire, on the outside of the tank to the rear of the tank. Right now we're seeing a close-up view of exactly the same thing. The important thing to notice is the gunfire, multiple rounds being fired from at least two different positions. And it's about 10 bursts in approximately 2 to 3 seconds. And according to our calculations, it indicates that both positions are firing automatic weapons. There is nothing in nature that would duplicate these type of thermal signatures, primarily because of the short duration of the bursts themselves. Nothing in nature could do that.
And I'll remind the American people one more time that during that entire time, those 6 hours, and indeed those 51 days, the FBI never fired one shot at the Davidians.
What we're going to see now is rapid fire in the courtyard right behind the dining room area. And you can see the fire going on, but it's difficult to see in real time. Now the slow motion shows things much more clearly. There are two positions. When we look at the tape carefully, there are two positions, and apparently by the signature itself of the burst, apparently is going from this area here into the dining room area.
What Allard saw was verified in an independent FLIR analysis done by Infraspection Institute for CBS 60 Minutes. Quote, "It was obvious to me on several occasions that there was gunfire or automatic weapons discharge seemingly fired toward the building from the outer perimeter." End quote. A second letter from Infraspection Institute states the fear that kept 60 Minutes from informing the American people. Quote, "Due to the potentially sensitive nature of this material and the resulting negative repercussions to infraspection, we are choosing to decline any further comments surrounding this taped incident and our subsequent professional opinion regarding its viewing." End quote. In addition to noticing the gunfire, Infraspection saw something else. Quote, "There were occasions on the video that seemed to appear as though people were entering, exiting, or being run over by an armored vehicle." End quote.
The whole idea here was not to hurt people, right?
That is correct.
Okay, I want to focus on that building right there and on that corner. You see it's now structurally sound. Would you go to the next photo? We're now looking kind of from the front corner. These are taken from the airplanes. You will see that where he is pointing, that section of the building is gone. Indeed, a great portion of the building is gone.
There was a discussion that there may come a point in this where we would try to poke holes in the building. My understanding...
I understood that.
Yes, sir.
This I don't see as a hole.
No, I understand that, yes, sir. And I do not believe that there were any bodies found in that area.
The closest bodies were found a little further in. Each one of those 5 bodies, it's reported, had extensive, according to the autopsy report, extensive body mutilation.
Davidian Stephen Henry had a gunshot wound through his chest. His leg was sheared off at the hip. James Riddle had been shot too, but a large circular portion of the right side of his chest had also been ripped out of his body. Riddle's red shirt was dangling from his wrist. His nearby coat had a red lining. This gunfire occurred at 11:24 a.m. About 10 minutes later, something got jammed near the tank's front wheel that caused the tread to come off. Something that was mostly red. The available evidence indicates that could be James Riddle's body. To attach the disabled tank to a retriever and tow it away, men had to expose themselves to the gunfire FBI officials said was coming from the Davidians.
This is one of these things, Mr. Chairman, that nags at you. Damage to the tanks, common sense tells me, would be reflected in the damage report. Almost 2 months ago, we requested it. Over 2 years have elapsed since this occurred. Surely the damage report had been compiled. I realize the wheels of bureaucracy turn awfully slowly in this town, but after 2 years...
I'll be glad to look into it and see what we can produce.
As the gassing continued, the women and children went to the safest place left inside Mount Carmel, the kitchen storage room, a first-floor steel-reinforced concrete room, a former vault at the bottom of the square wooden tower.
The women and children ended up going in there, and because they didn't have gas masks and stuff, they were covering themselves with wet blankets and wet towels and things like that.
We knew that protection was in there. We believe we finally were able to make entry into that compound and were able to insert gas inside that protective area.
They actually drove right through the middle of the building into the kitchen area and basically at point-blank range fired gas into the concrete room where the women and children were. In a cul-de-sac like that where there was no ventilation, they must have been going through.
There was only one door?
Front, yeah. There was no windows, no back door or anything like that.
We put massive gas in there. Their gas mask by that time had to be failing.
They would be coughing, choking. They would probably be unconscious. Some of them would probably be dead. Some would be basically inert. They may still be alive, they may still be breathing, but they're not going to be doing anything.
In planning very large actions of this sort, like going in at the building, you do a lot of planning, like if this happens, then this, we'll do this, and if this happens, then we'll do this, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you consider that fire might well occur in this instance, and if it does, we do this?
Yes, sir. We did.
By noon, Mount Carmel was a tinderbox. A heavy layer of dried CS dust coated everything inside. Large amounts of kerosene and Coleman fuel from containers crushed by armored vehicles saturated the floor. Vapors from methylene chloride, kerosene, and Coleman gas filled the air. Huge holes ripped open by the tanks let the 25-mile-per-hour Waco wind blow completely through Mount Carmel.
When the governmental agency made a decision to breach holes into the building, they set up a configuration of a pot-bellied stove. You wanted to burn slow, you close off the vents. If you wanted to burn fast, you open it up. Well, they made a configuration in that building that was consistent to a pot-bellied stove. Any type of fire that would start, even if there was no CS gas, if there was no flammable liquids, if there was nothing just but ordinary combustible materials. Once you have a fire incinerating in a building like that, it's going to grow to a fast, rapid propagation because of the venting.
At this front corner, a combat engineering vehicle has just made its last injection of CS. That small black dot is the nozzle tip, ice cold from the carbon dioxide propellant used to force the methylene chloride CS mixture into the building. Less than a minute later, the first of 3 separate fires that started in 3 separate locations within a 3-minute period began here on the 2nd floor, while the fresh mixture is at its most volatile as a fine mist.
Once ignited, both the CS and the methylene chloride will become involved in the fire and add to the fire. Those sources will tend to produce a fireball or a flash fire.
2 Branch Davidian survivors say they saw fireballs. Shortly after fresh CS was injected at this corner, the FLIR shows a second tank that's pulling away. As the corner comes into view, a fire is burning there. David Thibodeau said he was here and saw a fireball that ran the front length of Mount Carmel, possibly igniting another fire here in the kitchen dining room area, right next to the concrete room where the women and children had been gassed earlier. About a minute after the front fireball Thibodeau saw, another armored vehicle drives up to the rear of the crushed gymnasium and also pulls away. A few seconds later, survivor Derek Lovelock says a fireball raced from the rear of Mount Carmel to the front, igniting everything in its path.
At this point, the back of the gym was thoroughly destroyed, and it greatly disturbed me. At that point, I'd lost all hope. At 12 o'clock, someone yelled from the upstairs that there was a fire. The front, I could not get to the front because of what the tanks had come in, the stairwell that was closest to the front, so I went to the stairwell in the back. Because I'm thinking
the kids. I'm thinking Serenity C. Jones. I was thinking of Isaiah and Joseph, some of these kids that I've come to know and love. I get up there, and there was a catwalk that was leading over the rafters of the church area. I walked to the front. I got to a blanket. I opened the blanket up, and a wall of flame shoots down the hallway in front of my face down to the other end of the building. It was the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. I'm a drummer. And it was incredibly loud. I could not hear anything else other than this flame.
Well, do you know personally how the fire started?
No.
The place is beginning to fill up with black smoke, and me and Scott were stood there by the stairs, and there was this kind of ball of fire with a tremendous heat, which caused us to jump back out of the way. And it came from across. It came as if it came from the gym area across this way.
It's believed the fireball Derek Lovelock said he saw started here with this flash.
That flash was so bright that the operator of the FLIR thought it was so significant that he decided to fix his cursor in that area to remind him or other people looking at the tape that there was a very significant flash in the window. When we see it in slow motion and we see the flash, it appears to be a single flash, but it is not a single flash. It's actually two flashes. We got a primary flash and a secondary flash, and both these flashes last about 1/2 second each. And they're most likely detonations inside the building itself.
Now, if some of you just saw this flash here, that is a momentary event. In my opinion, that's a reflection due to sunlight reflecting off some object in that debris.
Sunlight reflections would show up as a flash on regular film which records light. But reflections don't generate enough heat, say specialists like Allard, to create a flash on infrared. Infraspection analysts noticed the same flash. Quote, a portion of the video showed a flash or pyrotechnic explosion in one portion of one of the buildings, end quote.
The FBI made it clear from the beginning it used nothing that could have started a fire.
Non-pyrotechnic delivery systems were utilized to insert CS gas.
Pyrotechnic devices actually burn, and as they do, tear gas is dispersed.
This pyrotechnic projectile is one of two found in the rubble of Mount Carmel. It's a 40-millimeter military device that's fired from a handheld grenade launcher. This one was found here, near the corner of Mount Carmel where the first fire started. The other was found here, in the kitchen dining room area. "20 seconds after the two gymnasium flashes, still more automatic gunfire can be seen coming from the field to the left of the demolition tank.
We counted the number of gun flashes, and in this particular case, we got 6 flashes in 1 second, which indicates it's a rapid-fire weapon of some kind. And we also can see from the tapes that the fire is going in this direction towards the gymnasium, where we saw the flash in the window.
is when the fire did start and the fire trucks did arrive, I didn't let them in. I held them at the checkpoint because I didn't want the firemen to drive into gunfire. I just wasn't going to permit it. And it's a terrible thing, a very terrible decision to have to make. But I didn't hesitate. It wasn't that, it took me that 2 seconds to make it. But we held the fire trucks. So that was our fire planning.
Most of the remaining Davidians were concentrated here in the kitchen dining room area. It was their only way out except for one thing. 2 men outside were firing machine guns at them.
In the 51 days the FBI was involved, they did not fire a single shot. First, that would mean quite certainly that 27 of the people who died in the compound, I think the autopsy report showed 27, I may be off by 1 or 2, who died of bullet wounds. Those were self-inflicted or inflicted by other members within the compound.
These are embers that are flying off the building, but you can see up in here that this is rapid gunfire. When we analyzed the tape, we found out that there's 2 people there in this area here. And they're firing for about 30 seconds in this area right here where we have the burning dining room area. And it's almost continuous gunfire. And towards the end of this particular section, we find out that the people doing the shooting are actually retreating away from the fire and shooting as they're retreating.
The machine gunning of the Davidians trapped in the burning kitchen dining room was not only visible to congressional investigators, it was even visible to home viewers. So was the gunfire behind the tank smashing into the rear of the gymnasium. Neither was mentioned despite the fact the FLIR tape shown to the Joint Committee had far better clarity than the copy used in this film.
You can see the flames real good from here.
There came a point in my rolling on the floor and trying to protect myself from the heat and being in the pitch black, not able to see, that the voices of those behind me screaming kind of got through to me. I recognized who they were. Could identify the voices. That kind of galvanized me to just leap to my feet and jump or dive head first in the general direction of where I figured the hole was. When I stood up, the skin was rolling off my hands. My coat was all melted on my back and smoking. I looked back over my shoulder, and the hole had just come out with a mass of flames. And the first thought that came to me was, I'm the only one.
They didn't want him to come out. They wanted to kill him.
Fire was just going on and on. We realized nobody came out, thinking maybe my husband didn't get out, but my children got out. A horrible, horrible way to die. I try not to think about it because I keep thinking at some point they felt all that heat. I kept thinking the people in the square, they were the ones who maybe they probably cooked to death. I think it was to be this tragedy to show what kind of a people we have as a government.
As soon as
U.S. The Branch Davidian Star David flag had fluttered to the ground. They ran the ATF flag up on that flagpole as a symbol of a military conquest because the whole world saw this as a symbol that the battle was over.
I love this country. I love the flag. I love saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I still cry at the national anthem. I hope not only law enforcement, but I hope everyone does that. The FBI is not, as we've been labeled for the past 2 years, anti-religious rights or anti-personal rights. We have plenty of freedoms in this country, which I love. We have the freedoms to stockpile weapons. I know I'm a Christian. I like practicing my Christian beliefs. I know I'm going to heaven when I die with my kids. I teach in charge of the nursery, used to do Sunday school, youth group leader. If someone tries to stop me from doing that, obviously I'm going to be upset. But that does not give me the right to go kill someone, go to my house, using my children as shields, and say, I'm not coming out, I've broken the law, I'm not coming out until God tells me to. That is wrong. The hearings have been on for 9 days or so. And I'm going to say this as nicely as I can, because a couple people have said, what can we learn from this? In 9 days, I can't learn to be a legislator. In 9 days, y'all can't learn to be law enforcement officers. Byron, Floyd Clark, Jeff Jamar, Dick Rogers, like them or not, or like what we do for a living or not, they've been law enforcement officers, some of them, longer than I've been alive. And with that comes a lot of experience. What I'm saying is, you have to trust the people in charge at the time. I'm low in the food chain, so I'm standing by what they did, because I do what I'm told as long as it's legal and moral.
My God, torturing babies and saying it's part of their job and saying it's okay because their parents were bad. Our whole society is structured around the notion that if parents are bad, we protect the children even against the parents. In this case, the FBI and the government took the position, why, not only do we not protect the children, we use them as an instrument to try to get their parents to do something. We'll torture them so their parents will do right. Oh, my God, where did they think that up?
We thought that their instincts, the motherly instincts would take place and that they would want their children out of that environment. It appears they don't care that much about their children, which is unfortunate.
The backward-bowed corpse of this 8-year-old girl shows what cyanide does to the human body. It makes the muscles contract so violently that they can actually break bones.
If one reviews the various use of cyanide as a method of putting prisoners to death, you note that these people are strapped in their chairs very heavily, and that's not to prevent them from escaping the gas. That's to prevent the individuals watching the execution observing the effects that cyanide has on the muscles of the individual.
As part of the evidence response team, I was one of the primary photographers that had to photograph the evidence before it was recovered and as it was being recovered and placed into the appropriate bags. I photographed the process, David Koresh's living quarters, and I also photographed all of the bodies from what is termed the bunker. Having been in a position to walk, touch, feel, hold, photograph, observe a great majority of the bodies in Waco, I'm left with an overall disturbing kind of haunting opinion that many of the people in the residence were homicide victims.
One of the FBI officials told Dr. Kirwani that they did not want us there because they wanted to do it themselves.
The FBI lab was extremely
in a hurry to get the evidence from us, and it took us several weeks to go through literally thousands of rounds. And all the bullets, bullet cartridges, fragments of grenades, they were all turned over to the FBI lab.
No independent examination of any of that evidence has been allowed, including the illegal firearms the FBI says were found in the rubble.
Is that a weapon, illegal, that you found at the compound?
It's an AK-47 type rifle that has been converted to permit full automatic fire.
Making it illegal?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I was panning the whole site, and one of the Rangers came up behind me while I was still taping and hit me on the shoulder and said, "You can't be doing that." And so I said, "Okay, that's fine, no problem." And then he asked for the tape. And I said, "Well, I'm shooting for Dr. Pirwani, and I'm not going to give you the tape until he says it's okay." Finally, we found Dr. Pirwani, talked to him, and he agreed that it was okay for me to give them the tape, so I did. They promised us that all they wanted to do was review it, and they would give it back to us the next day. And they didn't.
They told us that they had misplaced it. At one time they told us that I have it in my briefcase and I'll give it to you. In fact, we said that we're going to delay giving the reports until you give a tape back, and of course they said, "Sure, we'll give it a tape back next time we come to your office." We in fact suggested we would go to Waco and collect the tape from them. And they said, "No, it's the San Antonio office." And at a certain point along this discussion, they finally said, "The tape is lost. We can't give it to you."
At this point, is there any doubt in your mind or the Justice Department's mind that the fire was set by the cult members?
I have absolutely no doubt at all that the cult members set it based on all the information that has been furnished to me.
The survivors that came out, their clothes smelled of accelerants. They smelled of diesel fuel. They smelled of lantern fuel. They smelled of lighter fluid. And the laboratory later came back and confirmed that they had done it.
I would like to know why key information as to how some of this contamination occurred was omitted from the reports, specifically those survivors who exited the south side of the building. They had to walk through an area that was contaminated by fuel from large tanks spilled by the government tank operations. The thing that really concerns me is why the building was so totally destroyed afterwards. After the fire was out, there was no firefighting whatsoever attempted, and then the crime scene, and it was a crime scene, was totally, absolutely destroyed. I've seen this happen before.
Did you see the FBI changing the crime scene in any way?
Yes, sir. As I'd said earlier and didn't get to finish the answer, they were moving the vehicles, which destroyed valuable trajectory evidence. In the end, it turned out it didn't matter because the
But it didn't seem to be standard operating procedure. You don't consider that standard operating procedure, do you?
Certainly not in any crime scene I've ever been on. No.
We were commissioned early on in this as Deputy United States Marshals to carry a special commission so that we could prosecute federally anyone that lied to us, and we feel real comfortable, and Captain Burns does, that we were lied to.
Let me be clear. This investigation has not uncovered any evidence of political corruption or influences. We have not found any of that. There was no conspiracy to kill Branch Davidians.
The record of the Waco incident documents mistakes. What the record from Waco does not evidence, however, is any improper motive or intent on the part of law enforcement. David Koresh and the Davidians set fire to themselves and committed suicide. The government did not do that.
That assertion to me that the media and that the government has made a kind of blanket declaration that the Branch Davidians committed, quote, mass suicide, to equate it to a Jonestown, Guyana suicide, is the most irresponsible statement that can be attributed to anything having to do with the Waco incident. And I find it very offending to me and offensive to the memory of the Davidians and everyone else involved in this tragedy to wrap it up in a nice, clean, well, it was just a mass suicide in the story, because it was far from it.
What the people believed that would happen was that God was going to judge either the world or them. If it judged the world, they would survive. If it judged them, they would promptly be in heaven. As one of them afterwards said, Livingston Fagan, who lost a wife in the fire and his mother in the fire, he said, those of our people who died are highly honored in heaven, and so we should not worry about them. The thought was that the army of Babylon would kill them, as perhaps it ultimately did.
The way things are supposed to happen in this country is when someone's suspected of a crime, even if it's child abuse, even if it's capital murder, we give them a trial, a jury finds them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt before they go to sentencing, then a jury or a judge sentences them, and an appeals court makes sure the trial was conducted with due process. And then and only then do we kill them. We don't kill them first, like happened in Waco on April the 19th.